Welcome to Unsolved Cases, where we dust off the old files, sift through the shadows, and re-examine the crimes that history never fully solved. I'm your host, Larry Hunter, and today we're going back to the fog-drenched streets of Victorian London to revisit one of the most infamous murder sprees in human history. We all know the name, Jack the Ripper. He's been etched into our collective memory as the faceless butcher of Whitechapel, an embodiment of male rage, of violence against women, of evil with a blade in its hand. But what if we've been looking through the wrong keyhole this whole time? What if Jack was Jill? That's right. Today we're diving headfirst into one of the most radical theories surrounding the Whitechapel murders. The idea that the killer was not a man at all, but a woman. A theory long dismissed, often ridiculed, and yet more compelling with every piece of evidence we re-examine. Because think about it. In a society where women were considered incapable of such brutality, wouldn't that be the perfect disguise? No one was looking for her. No one even thought to. Some point to female midwives with medical knowledge and blood-stained clothes that wouldn't raise suspicion. Others to personal vendettas, revenge, or even the killer's intimate knowledge of the female body. And as we dig deeper, the traditional narrative, the one we've clung to for more than a century, starts to feel a little too convenient. This isn't just a theory about one killer. It's a theory that confronts our biases about violence, gender, and what evil looks like. So lace up your boots, pull your collar high against the London fog, and follow me down the cobblestone alleys of Whitechapel. Because once you consider the possibility of Jill the Ripper, you'll never see this mystery the same way again. Enter Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Yes, the creator of Sherlock Holmes himself. While London's finest were chasing shadows and the press was whipping the public into a frenzy about a male madman, Doyle was thinking like his famous detective, looking beyond the obvious, questioning assumptions, and considering possibilities that others dismissed. Doyle proposed something revolutionary. What if Jack the Ripper was a woman, or someone disguising themselves as one? Think about the genius of this observation. In Victorian London, few would suspect a woman of such brutal acts. This wasn't just criminal strategy. It was social camouflage of the highest order. A woman could move through Whitechapel's streets virtually invisible to suspicion, while every man became a potential suspect in the eyes of terrified residents. This idea gained serious traction in the 1930s, evolving into what we now call the Jill the Ripper theory. But Doyle's insight went deeper than simple gender disguise. He understood something that investigators of his time missed. The capacity for violence isn't determined by gender, and the most dangerous predators are often those who can hide in plain sight. The reluctance to consider a female suspect during the late 19th century wasn't just investigative oversight, it was systemic blindness. Women were underestimated, considered incapable of such calculated violence. But history tells us a different story. Pathological behavior and the capacity for brutal violence aren't confined to men. Women can be equally cunning, calculating, and vicious. So the question becomes, in a society that refused to see women as capable of such acts, could the perfect killer have been hiding behind the perfect disguise? Femininity itself? Let's dive into the evidence that suggests Jack the Ripper was actually Jill. Because when you examine the practical realities of these murders, a female perpetrator begins to make chilling sense. First, consider the context. An entire city was hunting for a male killer. Every man walking alone at night was scrutinized, questioned, followed. But a woman, she could move through those same streets with dramatically less suspicion. This oversight alone could explain why the case remains unresolved to this day. But it gets better, or rather, more sinister. During the late 19th century, certain women had legitimate reasons to be active at all hours. Midwives, for instance, were regularly called to birthing emergencies and medical situations throughout the night. This wasn't unusual. It was expected. Their nocturnal movements aroused no curiosity, no questions, no second glances. Now, here's where it gets truly disturbing: the blood evidence. Every one of these murders involved massive amounts of blood. For a male killer, blood-stained clothing would be immediately suspicious, requiring careful concealment or disposal. But for a midwife, blood on her clothing was routine, expected, completely unremarkable. Such evidence would be dismissed as simply part of her professional duties. And then, there's the anatomical knowledge, the precision of the incisions, the specific organs removed. This wasn't random violence. This was surgical precision. The killer possessed significant anatomical understanding, evident in how they navigated the human body with such expertise. Who in Victorian London would have such knowledge? Doctors, certainly, but also midwives, who worked intimately with human anatomy as part of their daily practice. In 1939, a man named William Stewart revolutionized thinking about the Ripper case with his book, Jack the Ripper: A New Theory. Stewart wasn't interested in naming the killer. He wanted to define the social role this person occupied. His approach was methodical, asking 4 crucial questions that pointed toward a stunning conclusion. Who could move around the city at night without drawing suspicion from family or community? A woman with professional obligations. Who could wear blood-stained clothing without raising alarm? A woman whose work regularly involved blood. Who possessed sufficient anatomical knowledge to commit these precise murders? A woman with medical training. And finally, who could be discovered at a crime scene and convincingly justify their presence? Once again, a woman in a caregiving profession. Stewart's theory centered on midwives, but expanded to include abortionists, both legal and illegal practitioners. He painted a picture of a woman harboring deep resentment against her female peers, possibly triggered by personal betrayal. Perhaps her husband's affair, perhaps professional jealousy, perhaps something even darker. But here's the most chilling detail. Stewart knew that midwives possessed a specific technique, applying pressure to certain points on the body to induce unconsciousness. This method, designed to provide comfort during childbirth, could easily be misused for sinister purposes. It was particularly common among midwives working in poorer communities, exactly where the Ripper struck. Imagine the scenario: a vulnerable woman, trusting a medical professional, suddenly rendered unconscious by someone who was supposed to help her. The betrayal is as horrifying as the violence that followed. Let's talk about Mary Kelly, the final canonical victim, found in a state that has puzzled investigators for over a century. She was discovered unclothed, but here's the crucial detail. Her garments were meticulously folded and placed on a chair nearby. This wasn't the scene of a violent struggle. This was the aftermath of voluntary undressing. The Jill the Ripper theory offers a chilling explanation. What if Mary Kelly and other victims weren't attacked on the street, but were visiting someone they trusted? What if they had voluntarily disrobed for what they believed was a medical procedure? In Victorian London, illegal abortions were performed discreetly by midwives and other practitioners. Women would naturally undress for such procedures, trusting these medical professionals with their lives and secrets. The calm demeanor of the victims, the absence of signs indicating violent stripping, it all points toward women who believed they were engaging in routine medical consultations. A midwife, or someone posing as one, could approach these vulnerable women without arousing any suspicion. She could gain their complete trust under the guise of providing health care. In a time when abortion was both dangerous and illegal, women depended entirely on the secrecy and trustworthiness of these practitioners. But there's another layer to this deception, one that shows just how calculated this killer might have been. Every murder except Elizabeth Stride's aligned perfectly with the arrival of cattle boats at the Thames. These boats created chaos along the docks, noise, movement, crowds of workers. The theory suggests our killer, intimately familiar with local schedules, used this commotion as cover. The sounds of distress would be drowned out by the cacophony of commerce. The killer could operate undetected and escape quickly using the same chaotic river traffic that provided her cover. This wasn't random violence. This was strategic, methodical planning by someone who understood both human psychology and the rhythms of London's industrial life. Now, let me tell you about a bonnet. A simple piece of headwear that might hold the key to understanding how our killer operated. Mary Ann Nichols, the first canonical victim, excited, told her landlord about a new bonnet she had recently acquired. "I'll soon get my DOS money," she said proudly. "See what a jolly bonnet I've got now." This bright, cheerful bonnet was completely out of place in the grim poverty of Whitechapel, where women like Nichols struggled just to survive. But here's what's fascinating. Nichols didn't announce this gift with the pride you'd expect if it came from a male admirer. Instead, she mentioned it with notable secrecy, suggesting the gift giver was someone she couldn't publicly acknowledge. In the marginalized communities of Victorian London, women often depended on each other for survival. Problems like prostitution, poverty, and unwanted pregnancies were rampant, and midwives provided both medical and emotional support. If a man had given Nichols that bonnet, she might have proudly announced it as a symbol of affection or protection. But her hushed secrecy suggests something else entirely: a female benefactor operating in shadows. The theory suggests that a mad midwife or female killer used gifts like this bonnet to build trust with her victims. By offering such gestures of goodwill, she could lower their defenses, drawing them unwittingly into peril. A midwife, already a respected community figure, could uniquely capitalize on her position to access and manipulate vulnerable women. In Victorian society, bonnets weren't just clothing. They were symbols of respectability and identity. For a woman of the streets, possessing a fashionable bonnet could elevate social status, shield from judgment, provide psychological comfort. Such a gift represented acceptance, belonging, hope. The significance of that bonnet in Nichols' final days hints at a deeper, more tragic dynamic. A relationship initially based on trust, systematically exploited, then catastrophically betrayed. But what if we've been thinking about this all wrong? What if the killer wasn't actually a woman, but someone who understood the power of appearing to be one? Arthur Conan Doyle didn't just suggest the killer might be female. He proposed something even more intriguing: that a man might have disguised himself as a woman to carry out these murders. Think about the strategic brilliance of this approach. In the chaotic, impoverished neighborhoods of Whitechapel, a man loitering without purpose would immediately attract attention. But a man convincingly disguised as a woman, particularly one appearing to offer care or companionship, could approach victims with dramatically reduced risk of suspicion. This wasn't just about clothing. This was about exploiting Victorian society's fundamental assumptions about gender. Women were perceived as inherently non-threatening, nurturing, safe. A killer who could adopt this persona wouldn't just be hidden. He'd be invisible, protected by society's own prejudices. Conan Doyle's extensive experience crafting Sherlock Holmes stories lends credibility to this theory. Holmes himself was a master of disguise, understanding that the most effective deceptions exploit what people expect to see, rather than what's actually there. The author knew that apparent truths often obscure deeper realities. The success of such a disguise would require perfect timing, intimate knowledge of local customs, and sophisticated understanding of gender roles. This suggests a killer who was not only brutal, but brilliantly strategic, someone who turned Victorian society's expectations into deadly weapons. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Jack the Ripper mystery isn't the brutality itself, but the possibility that the perpetrator transformed societal trust into a tool for murder. The killer didn't just hide from society. He weaponized society's blindness against itself. Now let's talk about Mary Pearcey, the only woman ever seriously considered as a Jack the Ripper suspect, and arguably the most compelling candidate for the Jill the Ripper theory. Pearcey lived in London during the exact period when the Whitechapel murders occurred. But here's the truly unsettling detail. The chain of Ripper killings ended abruptly, just before Pearcey was arrested, tried, and executed in 1890 for brutally murdering her lover's wife and child. The method of her documented crime mirrors the Ripper's signature brutality. Pearcey viciously slashed her victim's throat, used blunt force trauma, and left the scene drenched in blood. The same level of ferocity witnessed in the Ripper cases. She smothered the child and disposed of the body without a trace of remorse. Most tellingly, she made no attempt to clean up the crime scene, leaving behind a massive trail of blood, exactly like what was found at several Ripper murder sites. Decades later, forensic technology added a new twist. DNA testing on a postage stamp from a purported Jack the Ripper letter revealed evidence suggesting female presence. While this evidence remains controversial and not definitive, it provided new fuel for the Jill the Ripper hypothesis. But perhaps most intriguing is a cryptic letter Pearcey wrote from prison to a Madrid newspaper. It contained a puzzling phrase, MECP, last wish of MEW have not betrayed. Some theorists believe MECP represents the initials of 4 canonical Ripper victims: Mary Kelly, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Polly Nichols. The precision of this alignment seems too exact for coincidence, and the enigmatic nature suggests someone harboring dangerous, perhaps confession-worthy secrets. Mary Pearcey fits an alternative psychological profile of the Ripper, someone driven by repressed trauma, overwhelming jealousy, or deep-seated animosity toward other women. Her life was consumed by obsession, betrayal, and emotional instability. When her lover, Frank Hogg, chose to remain with his wife, it triggered a violent psychological breakdown, resulting in double homicide. If she could enact such savagery in a domestic setting, could she have previously executed similar violence on strangers? As a woman wandering Victorian London, possibly bloodied, she would have remained largely unnoticed, particularly if she masqueraded as a midwife or nurse, professions naturally associated with blood. So where does this leave us? After examining the evidence, the theories, the suspects, and the social dynamics of Victorian London, what can we conclude about the possibility that Jack the Ripper was actually Jill? The traditional view dismisses a female Ripper as improbable, but the evidence suggests otherwise. The practical advantages a woman would have possessed: freedom of movement, professional cover for blood-stained clothing, access to vulnerable victims, anatomical knowledge, and society's fundamental blindness to female violence, create a compelling case. Whether the killer was a woman operating under professional cover, a man brilliantly disguised as a woman, or someone like Mary Pearcey driven by jealousy and rage, the Jill the Ripper theory forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our assumptions. We've spent over a century chasing shadows shaped by Victorian prejudices about gender, violence, and evil itself. We've imagined a monster when the truth might be far more disturbing: a calculating individual who used society's blindness as the perfect weapon. The streets of Whitechapel have long since been transformed, but the mystery remains. Somewhere in the fog of history, between what we think we know and what actually happened, the truth about Jack, or Jill, the Ripper, continues to elude us. Perhaps that's the most unsettling revelation of all: that our most notorious killer succeeded not just in evading capture, but in hiding behind our own assumptions about who monsters can be. If you want to know more about the Jill the Ripper theory, overlooked suspects, the untold layers of the Whitechapel murders, and more such cold cases, download the Skoob app on the App Store or Google Play to unlock the full experience. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the fog of history. Remember, assumptions can be just as dangerous as knives, and sometimes the killer you're looking for is the one no one suspects. Until next time, this has been Unsolved Cases. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, And beware the silence behind the skirts.